Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Thank you all for joining me in this discussion. This is our Ramadan reflection on Surat al-Nur. Surat al-Nur is the 24th chapter of the Quran. It is a Medinan chapter. And as Medinan chapters usually go, it contains a lot of instructions for the Muslim community on how to govern themselves personally and also how to govern activities within the Muslim community so that we have a cohesive society that serves God and serves human beings. So it is called Surat al-Nur, the chapter of the light. And why is it called thus? It is called thus because within the chapter there is a verse which is referred to as the light verse. Because why is it called the light verse? Because it describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Nur samawati wal ard, as the light of the heavens and the earth. This is in fact a very moving verse for Muslims. I know whenever I recite that in the prayer, many Muslims feel moved by this. Even Muslims who do not speak Arabic, but they have a rough idea that this verse is talking about Allah as the light of the heavens and the earth. It just fills one with awe and makes one feel close to Allah Azza wa Jal. Even some non-Muslims have commented upon the Quran, and they have said that they were struck by this particular verse and its description of Allah Azza wa Jal. So it says, Allahu nur samawati wal ard, masalu nurihi kamishkatin fiha misbah. The example of his light is as a كمثل مثل نوره كمثل مشكاة. It is a lamp inside of a lamp. And then that further lamp is within a niche. So you can imagine the glow of light concentrated within that niche. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us this example to help us to understand something about himself. But of course, this is just an inkling. We cannot fully understand how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in terms of his essence. We can understand something about his attributes, his kindness, his mercy, his generosity, his forgiving nature, and so on. But we cannot understand the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given the limitations in our own human understanding. Nonetheless, that imagery gives us a lot to reflect upon. Now, turning to the details of the surah and its instructions, the surah calls itself a surah. It begins by saying Suratun Anzalna. It is a surah that we have revealed and in which we have detailed. God is saying we have detailed instructions for the Muslims. One of the instructions is about Muslims not sharing news without proper verification. Now, nowadays, we are faced with a lot of fake news, and anyone can become victim of that. Sharing news because somebody was sent it to you and you thought it was good news, and you're happy to share it with everyone else. And it turns out later on that this was fake news. Somebody manufactured that. So we have to be very careful and verify what we are circulating. Now, especially so when it comes to slander against other persons within the community. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the ifk or to the slander and saying, Inna ladina ja'u bil ifki usbatum minkum. The people who have actually come forward with this slander is a group from among you. So we have to watch for that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you hear such things, like you hear some scandal going about, some rumor about people in the community, why don't you say that, it is not for us to say anything about that. We don't know anything about that. Why do you jump in and start putting your tongue into that? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إذ تلقونه بألسنتكم وتقولون بأفواهكم ما ليس لكم به علم. When you received it with your tongues and you started to speak about things of which you have no knowledge, وتحسبونه هينا وهو عند الله عظيم. And you thought that this was something very light, but in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is something great. So we should be watchful of what we say, how we say it, to whom we say it, and we should be careful not to repeat things without proper verification. in this surah, we have prescriptions about staying modest within our communities and preserving decency and dignity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the men first by saying, "Qul lil mu'minina yaghuddu min absarihim wa yahfadhu furujahum." Tell the believing men that they are to lower their gazes and they are to guard their private parts. ذلك أزكى لهم. This is more pure for them. So it starts with the men. The men have to lower their gaze, and then it turns to and guard their private parts. Then it turns to the women as well, and says, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ. And say to the women as well, the believing women, that they are to lower their gazes and also to guard their private parts. And it then gives more prescriptions in the case of women, because we know in most societies, even in our present liberal society, it is understood that women will wear more clothing than men and or cover up more of their bodies than men do. And so we can see naturally that in the Quranic prescription, there is some further stipulation for women as well. And it says that the women have exemptions, like they can reveal their beauty to their fathers, their sons, their husbands' fathers, their husbands' sons from another marriage, their brothers, the sons of their sisters, the sons of their brothers, and so on, and from the children naturally. And those men who do not have any desire towards women. So the Quran is showing a very balanced approach in what it prescribes in terms of women's dress. And of course, there could be older women who are not going to cause a stir if they relax some of the restrictions that they used to live by when they were younger. So in that vein, in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْقَوَاعِدُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. As for the women who are now retired, there is no harm on them if they should leave off their thiyab. A thiyab could be like an outer garment. So a woman in a traditional society may have her house clothes that is convenient for her when she goes about her daily chores. But then if she's going to go outside of the house or greet a stranger, that's when she's going to grab a larger garment and put it over her body. So it seems that the Quran is saying, as for the retired women, they can leave off that outer garment, especially if la yarjuna nikah, they are not expecting to get married. So they pass that age and they're not going to be a lure for someone else. Now, of course, having prescribed all of these rules about decency and so on, the Quran even goes further in prescribing for children. When the children reach a certain age, they are to ask permission of their parents before they enter the parents' room, especially at such times when the parents are likely to have put off some of their clothing. Like, for example, in the midday heat, if you think of the summer and the heat of Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. So maybe at that time, people want to relax a little bit. They take an afternoon nap. And obviously after, as the Quran says, Ba'da Salatil Isha, after the Isha prayer at night. So at these times, the children should seek permission before entering the room. They cannot just barge in the room like that. So children are being taught this decency as well. Now, if you approach another person's house, you are to give the salam from the outside, according to this surah, and make sure that you are welcome before you actually go in. And what if you come to a house that is empty? So you give the salam, there's no response, and obviously nobody is there. Then if this is an abandoned house, then you are allowed to go in after making proper announcement and proper verification. Of course, you have to see the situation in which you live. There could be trespassing laws and so on. So you have to abide by all of these. But the Quran was already introducing some kind of stipulation that is similar to trespassing laws. You can't just simply go into anywhere that you like. You have to verify in case there is an owner, in case there is somebody there, and make sure that you will not be barging in unwelcome. Now, after all of these stipulations and regulations, if people then go out of their way to seek to do evil things, then the penalty is also harsh. And in this surah, we have the stipulation, الزانية والزاني فاجلدوا كل واحد منهما مئة جلدة. As for the adulterer, whether male or female, you are to flog each of them 100 stripes. And then what about the people who are going to give witness to this? You must actually bring witnesses. If somebody was to make an accusation against a chaste woman, he has to bring forth 4 witnesses. And if he cannot produce the 4 witnesses, then he better not come forward, because otherwise he will be charged with slander. And the punishment for slander will be 80 lashes. And then his testimony will not be accepted anymore. So you see that very strict measures were put in society so that the people who might be penalized with the penalty for adultery would be people who did it in such a blatant way that you can procure 4 witnesses to be able to testify specifically to the ultimate act being done. Not only that they're suspected that this is, but they should be able to say that this is what we have observed. But the penalty is given there in the Quran as a kind of warning to would-be criminals, but also to register the gravity of the crime, even if nobody ever gets punished by this for this crime in this way. But nonetheless, it shows that this is something totally repugnant in the sight of God. Now, there are prescriptions as well. If a man were to accuse his wife, he too has to bring 4 witnesses. And if he doesn't have 4 witnesses, then he has to testify 5 times, as if to say 1 on his own behalf and 4 times on behalf of non-existing witnesses. And each time he's to say that if what I'm saying is not true, let the curse of God be upon me. And now the woman will be called to testify, and she only has to say, and she will also say 5 times, that my husband is not telling the truth, and if indeed he's telling the truth, may God's anger be on me. And once this kind of testimony is given by both sides, then the qadi or the judge will part the husband and wife, because obviously after they've reached this stage of recrimination, they have actually spoiled the relationship. So whatever the truth of the accusation, now they have spoken against each other in a public way, and naturally the marriage will have to be dissolved. But what is interesting here is that the woman is not punished because of the accusation of her husband, since he has come to her own defense and given testimony to her own innocence in the light of that charge. This is, by comparison, something very different from what we find in the Bible, where we have in the book of Numbers a prescription which is along similar lines, but the result is very different. It says there that if a man feels a jealousy about his wife, then he's to come to the priest and make this known. And then the priest is to call the woman and give her a bitter water to drink, and that water will be sprinkled with dust from the temple floor. And then as she's drinking that, the priest is going to pronounce a curse that if the woman is in fact guilty, her thighs will waste away and her belly will swell. Obviously you can see that the woman in that situation would be put in dire straits, and she might be fearful in case that curse might actually come to pass. And then of course she's given this bitter water. She's put through what is called an ordeal, and this sort of trial is called a trial by ordeal. But the Quran obviously has something very different, and in cases like this we see that the Quran is actually chalking out a new way of dealing with situations and putting into place new principles of fairness and justice for women in particular, but for all people more generally. Much more can be said about the surah, but I want to close at this point. So let me thank you all for joining me in this formal discourse on Surat al-Nur, the 24th chapter of the Quran. This is one of our Ramadan reflections in the year 2020. Thank you. I'm your brother in faith, Shabir Ali. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.